See, right. Just a reminder to mark attendance if you haven't as well already. So just a note about our events, and we are just going to wait for the notice that we're live. Yes, so this is the QR code to mark attendance. If you haven't done so, please do scan it if you haven't, so that we can connect with you as well. All right. All right. So a very good evening, everyone. So if we could just get everyone's attention for this. So very good evening, brothers and sisters, and everyone in the Dharma. All right. Thank you for attending today's talk. All right, and we're all looking forward to it on Buddhism and Health in a Global Historical Perspective by Prof. Pierce Salguero. I'm Wykid, and I'll be your facilitator this evening. So before this talk begins, please be reminded to either turn off your mobile phones or switch them to silent mode. And there will be a Q&A session, of course, after this talk. So later, just do raise your hand if you have any questions, and we'll be right over to hand you the mic, right? So along the way, also, we'd like to just, once again, if in case you haven't heard, just yet another pointer about the attendance, right? And we'll just be beginning right now. So if we can introduce, all right, our speaker for this evening, right? So we are very honored to invite Professor Pierce Salguero. And Professor Pierce Salguero is a health humanities scholar specializing in Buddhism and medicine, right? And he teaches at Penn State Abington and holds a PhD in history of medicine from Johns Hopkins. And he also edits Asian Medicine, which is a leading journal on traditional Asian healing. So truly interdisciplinary. I think we're really all looking forward to this evening's talk. So if you could join me in welcoming Prof. Pierce Salguero.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to the Bomingsa Temple here for the invitation to come and join you today. I'm very grateful to be here. I'm only in Singapore for 3 days. I just arrived. If I fall asleep during my talk, I'm sorry. I'm a little bit jet lagged. I came to Singapore one time for maybe like 6 hours, 30 years ago. And I only just saw downtown. I saw the airport and I saw the center of the city, and then left for Malaysia very quickly. But I've just had a really wonderful time here the last few days, visiting friends and getting to know this really interesting and amazing place. And I'm looking forward to coming back and spending more time than just 3 days next time. So I'm very happy to be here with you, and hopefully this is the beginning of a nice relationship with Bomingsa, and I will come back in the future sometime. So yeah, thank you. So I am a scholar of Buddhism and medicine. I say Buddhist medicine. I'll tell you why I say that. And I have a PhD in the history of medicine, and it's very unusual for somebody from the West to study Asian medicine, never mind Buddhist medicine. That is not part of the usual curriculum in the history of medicine. History of medicine PhDs usually study history of European medicine. Maybe a few people study the history of Zhongyi. Yeah. But very few people have explored the connections between Buddhism and medicine. And so this is my my passion. I have been studying this for 30 years now. The reason I was in Singapore 30 years ago was because I was on my way to Thailand. And I flew into Singapore and then went to Thailand. And when I got to Thailand, So just after leaving Singapore last time, 30 years ago, I arrived in Thailand and I discovered Buddhist medicine in Thailand. And this began my 30-year journey of exploring this subject. Yeah, to come back to Singapore now, 30 years later, and give this presentation is like a full circle for me. Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to do that. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself so that you understand who I am. Who is this person here speaking to us at a Buddhist temple in Singapore about Buddhist medicine, right? Who is this person who's come from far away to talk to us about this? So I want to share with you some of the work that I've been doing so you understand what my background is and how I think about this topic. So I'm not a monk, a Buddhist monk. They would talk about this topic very differently. I'm a scholar. But I spent some time when I was in Thailand 30 years ago in a monastery, shaved my head, wore white robes, anagarika, lived in temples, did lots of Buddhist practice. But I decided eventually that so I also studied Thai medicine, learning about herbs and different kinds of techniques for healing. But I decided back then the thing that was most interesting to me was the history of this practice, the history and the connections between Buddhism and medicine and how they have changed and how they have spread around Asia and how they are so intertwined. Buddhism and medicine are so interconnected. And this became my primary interest to study that historically. So instead of becoming a monk, instead of becoming a practitioner of traditional medicine, becoming a doctor, I decided to become a professor in history of medicine. And so the first thing I did when I moved back to go to graduate school was to write about Thai medicine. And I did a master's degree and I wrote a little book about traditional Thai medicine. But then I discovered something very, very interesting to me was about the connections between Buddhism and medicine in China. And so I shifted from working on Thailand to working on China. I shifted from contemporary, modern traditional medicine to history. And I shifted from studying Theravada Buddhism to Chinese Mahayana Buddhism and its relationship with medicine. And so I published, this is my PhD thesis, and the book that came from that was a study of the introduction of Indian medicine into China. When Buddhism moved from India to China, they introduced Buddhism, but they also introduced Indian medicine. And so how did China in the medieval period, in the Tang dynasty, how did they understand healing and medicine coming from India? That's what this book is about. And then I have expanded over time to more locations, more areas. So some of my books have focused on medieval China and Japan, and then the modern world. And then I have a ethnography project doing interviews with Buddhist temples in Philadelphia, the city that I live in the United States. So Philadelphia, if you're not familiar with it, Philadelphia is on the East Coast of the United States, in between Washington, D.C. and New York. So as part of the East Coast in America, we have many large cities in a row going up, Washington, Philadelphia, all the way up to Boston. And these cities are all of them have very large Asian populations, people from all over Asia and their children, second generation, sometimes third generation. And Philadelphia, my city, has about 50 Buddhist temples. We have Thai temples, Vietnamese temples, Lao temples, Cambodian temples, Chinese temples, Taiwanese temples. I don't think we have a Singaporean temple. I don't think we have one. It may be a growth opportunity for you, I don't know. But we have many temples of many different kinds with many different types of people from many different cultures, many different languages. And so I have been doing some interviews now for many years with these communities, asking about Buddhism and health, Buddhism and medicine in these places. So you may be aware of this. You might know that in the United States, healthcare is extremely expensive, very difficult for people coming from abroad to be able to afford healthcare is a real problem. And if they can afford it, they maybe can't communicate so well because the language issues, right? People who just come from a different country don't understand the healthcare system. It's difficult access, and healthcare system is broken in my country. It doesn't work very well. And for many communities, the Buddhist temples are actually the place where that connection happens. Buddhist temples are helping people to get healthcare, to do translation, to get health insurance. Even you need a ride to the hospital, a ride to go get your doctor's appointment. Sometimes the temples have festivals where it's a health fair where they bring in doctors and nurses to the temple, and the people go to the temple and they get all their needs, their medical needs taken care of. So Buddhist temples are very active in America in the healthcare area. So this has been another place that I've been active. And then finally, I have gotten a lot of my friends to participate in projects related to this topic. So these two books here, I got 96 scholars from around the world to translate texts, to translate materials from Sanskrit, Pali, Chinese, Tibetan, Japanese, Mongol, Khmer, all sorts of languages, to translate materials about Buddhist medicine, Buddhist healthcare, Buddhism and healing, to translate those materials into English so that we can have a source record that is from all over Asia related to this topic. So we now have 1,500 pages of translations done by scholars from all over the place. Some historical, very old Pali texts, and also some very new texts, interviews with doctors in Mongolia or whatever. Again, Singapore is not there. It's not in the book. And then finally, I wrote this book, Global History of Buddhism and Medicine. This is my craziest book ever, where I decided I would write the history of 2,500 years of history of all over the world, right, of Buddhism and medicine. Really, it's a summary of everything else. It's summarizing the whole picture, everything I know about Buddhism and medicine, everything any other scholars have written about, anything that I was able to read, anything that I was able to research myself went into this book. You think Singapore is there? No, it's not there. This is a problem with my research. It is. It's a problem with my research that Singapore is not represented in this material. Part of the problem is I don't know any scholars that work on Singapore. My friend Michael lives in Singapore now. Now he can do the research. Maybe we can convince him to do it. Maybe some of you are scholars. Maybe some of you are interested in this topic. If so, please tell me about Buddhist medicine in Singapore, because it's a missing piece of this story. I don't want to assume that Buddhist medicine in Singapore looks like Buddhist medicine anywhere else, because Singapore is unique. I've only been here for 2 days and 6 hours, but I know Singapore is unique. This is an amazing country. I've had a tour of many different neighborhoods, many different cultures mixed together, many different types of food I've eaten in 2 days. So I think Buddhist medicine here is going to be very unique. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from you so that I can learn how to put Singapore into my story. So you thought you were coming to learn from me, right? No, I said, yes, I'll come to this temple and give this talk because I want to learn from you. That's why I'm here. Yeah, so did you get my email address? Please take my email address. Teach me, please. I want to do better. Next time I come here, I want to know more about Buddhist medicine in Singapore. So maybe you're asking right now, you're like, Professor Sagar, I don't know what Buddhist medicine is. Do you know what Buddhist medicine is? Do you know what Buddhist medicine is? Yeah. Never heard it, right? Yeah. So I have heard some scholars in China, in Taiwan, they talk about 佛医. Some scholars in Chinese, when they speak Chinese, they write books about 佛医. Some Japanese scholars, they write books about Bukkyo Igaku. They use these characters. So some people talk about Buddhist medicine like a thing, like a name for something. But mostly, I made this up myself. Mostly, this is a name for something that I invented. And the reason I invented this is because there are a lot of really interesting things all around the world, from all kinds of different Buddhist communities, from all kinds of different cultures, that relate to one another, that belong together, but nobody sees them as belonging together. Nobody noticed that they belong together. Right? So I invented this term, and I use this term similar to the term Buddhist art. Raise your hand if you know what Buddhist art is. You know what Buddhist art is? Buddhist art is a name that we also invented, right? We invented this term. And we invented the term so that we can talk about very different things. We can talk about sculpture from India from 2,000 years ago, and we can say that's Buddhist art. But we can also look at calligraphy from Zen calligraphy from Japan and say that's Buddhist art. And we can look at Tibetan Thangka paintings, and we can say that's Buddhist art. And we can look at graffiti painted in the city that is a picture of a Buddha, and we can call that Buddhist art. We can look at movies from Korea and call that Buddhist art, right? We can use that label, Buddhist art, to talk about things that are very different from one another. But what makes them Buddhist art? What makes them all Buddhist art? Why are all those things Buddhist art? Sometimes it's because it's a picture of a Buddha. Sometimes it's because it's a calligraphy of a character that has some meaning in Buddhism. Sometimes it's Buddhist art just because the person who made the art is Buddhist. And this was part of their expression of their Buddhist identity, right? Sometimes it's Buddhist art because it was made at a temple. Sometimes it's Buddhist art because Buddhist people paid for it to be made, right? There's all kinds of reasons why maybe it can be called Buddhist art. And so we have this category, Buddhist art, that allows us to look at all of those different things made for all different reasons, made by all different people, but we can study them together. We can look at them together and say, these belong together somehow, right? Like a sculpture from ancient India, an architectural construction from Japan, maybe this temple with the statues right here, they all belong together somehow, right? Even though they look different, even though they come from different cultures, they somehow belong together. Does that make sense? Okay, Buddhist medicine, it's the same thing. We're not talking about art, now we're talking about healing practices, ideas about health, ideas about medicine, practices that people do. Sometimes it's Buddhist because they're doing it in a temple. Sometimes it's Buddhist because the person doing it is Buddhist and they feel this is part of their Buddhist identity. Sometimes it's Buddhist because the content has something to do with the Buddha or with, Buddhist ideas. right? So it's different. It's not all the same thing. It looks different, but we can talk about it together. We can talk about it fitting together somehow. Could be 2,000 years ago, could be today, but we can talk about it in the same category, using the same word. So some examples of Buddhist medicine. Maybe you heard about the Dunhuang manuscripts. Most people, I think, heard about this, right? These are manuscripts from Western China, from Dunhuang. Tens of thousands of manuscripts discovered in a cave in Dunhuang. Many of them have medical healing practices, diagrams, all kinds of interesting things to say about medicine. Maybe some of you know about the Buddhist hospitals that were built all over the Khmer Empire. Today it's Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand, and there's many of these ruins are still there. So the king in the 12th century, Jayavarman VII, he built 102 of these hospitals all over mainland Southeast Asia. This is an example of Buddhist medicine. There's a series of medical tanka paintings, the Tibetan tanka paintings, that illustrate the entire practice, the entire knowledge of Tibetan medicine, Soa Rigpa. These were made at the turn of the 17th to 18th century. They illustrate the whole body of knowledge in Tibet about medicine. The very first one, I'll show a picture of in a minute. The very first tanka is the medicine Buddha, who's supposedly taught all of the information. Right? So this is Buddhist medicine. And then in Thailand, where I first learned about Buddhist medicine, if you've been to Thailand, if you went to Bangkok, if you ever went to Bangkok as a tourist, maybe you went to Wat Pratitapon, Wat Po. It's the old national temple, and this temple is famous for, well, it's most famous for the reclining Buddha, the big reclining Buddha. That's most famous, but among practitioners of Thai medicine, like I used to be, Wat Po is most famous for these medical artifacts that are around the temple, including all of these sculptures and inscriptions showing different kinds of medical procedures that were done in the 19th century and that are still there today. That's also Buddhist medicine, right? So sometimes it's Buddhist medicine because it's in a temple. Sometimes it's Buddhist medicine because it was done by Buddhists. Sometimes it's Buddhist medicine because the content is Buddhist. So I met a surgeon, a neurosurgeon, a cardiologist, a cardiology surgeon, modern, very, very, very modern scientific medicine using the latest technology in Korea. But before he did his surgery, he visualized himself to be one of the hands of Guan Yin. Right? Is that Buddhist medicine? Yeah, sometimes it's Buddhist because it's done by somebody who's Buddhist and it's part of their Buddhist identity, right? Yeah, so Buddhist medicine is a category I invented to be able to talk about all of these things together, right? What makes these Buddhists is sometimes different, but they belong together, I think. I think they belong together. You can disagree, it's okay. If at the end of my talk you're like, no, this is nonsense, then that's okay. Scholars like to disagree. We like to argue. It makes us happy. So you disagree with me, it's okay. You make me happy, no problem. But for me, it's important to think about Buddhist medicine as a thing, as a term. It's important. I'm gonna show you why I think it's important. I'm gonna show you why, if we start to think about Buddhist medicine, why it changes some very important things. I'll do that later. First, I want to talk a little bit more about the history, because I said I'm a historian, and I said I would talk about global history, global historical context. That was the name of this talk. So I will talk a little bit about the history. Then I'll tell you why I think all of this is so important. Yeah? So Buddhist medicine is not one thing. It's different, right? It changes over time. It's different from place to place, different cultures. There's lots of different reasons, just like Buddhist art, right? Buddhist art changes over time. But in my research, I think about some periods of time that are interesting in the development of Buddhist medicine over history. So the first thing is, we have these schools of Buddhism that develop, right? We have the early Buddhism, and then we have Mahayana, and then we have Vajrayana. And so part of what I've noticed in my research is that early Buddhism, I'm going to talk about some of the details of what's included in early Buddhism. Early Buddhism has ideas about medicine. It has ideas about health, well-being. But early Buddhism is not so sure that monks should be involved in medicine. Early Buddhism says, there's monks and there's doctors, and these are two different people. And monks should be doing monk things. They should be meditating. They should be focusing on nibbana. Doctors, they can focus on health. Right? So there's a little bit of a split. But this changes with Mahayana. Mahayana Buddhism is different. Mahayana Buddhism develops a different idea. In Mahayana Buddhism, the ideal is to be the bodhisattva, right? Everybody knows this. And the bodhisattva is extending compassion out into the world. That's the ideal. And so in the Mahayana texts, particularly in the Chinese language texts, healing becomes very important for Mahayana Buddhism. Now, to be a true bodhisattva, you should be somehow helping others to alleviate their suffering. And one of the ways you can do that is by being a medical practitioner yourself, or by supporting with donations, with charity, supporting other kinds of organizations to help, right? So in Mahayana Buddhism, there's an emphasis very early on, there's an emphasis on temples being places of help, right? Including medical help. Then Tantric Buddhism or Vajrayana Buddhism, right? At that point, healing becomes even more important, even more central to the ideas that are talked about in Buddhist texts, right? Because in Vajrayana, part of the ritual practices that you do in order to become awakened also heal your body at the same time. Your body is transformed through the Dharma, right? That's one of the main ideas of Tantra, is that while you practice the Dharma, your body is transformed, right? So Buddhism, I think medicine becomes more important to Buddhism as time goes by, right? So initially, it's a little bit separate. Mahayana becomes closer. Vajrayana becomes even closer. I'm going to talk about this period of time where Buddhism is spreading around Asia. The first millennium CE, that's a very scholarly way to say from the year 1 to the year 1000, right? So from 2000 years ago to 1000 years ago, Buddhism was spreading around Asia. And everywhere that Buddhism spread, it always brought medical ideas, new medical ideas spread along with Buddhism. And I'm going to talk about in the second millennium, so that's the last 1,000 years, more or less, how this developed into different regional forms of Buddhist medicine. Just like you can notice that Japanese or East Asian Buddhist art has a similarity to it, and South Asian Buddhist art has a similarity to it, and Central Asian Buddhist art has a similarity to it. You can kind of do the same with medicine. You can say, well, there's kind of East Asian, there's kind of South Asian, Southeast Asian, there's some patterns. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the modernization and the globalization of the last 100 years and what's happened to Buddhist medicine during that time period. So let's talk a little bit about early Indian Buddhism, the earliest Buddhist texts that we have. So these are Pali texts and some early Sanskrit texts. We have some early Chinese translations that are probably from this era as well. So maybe you could say this is like some foundational ideas about Buddhist medicine, right? Some very kind of basic foundational ideas. So probably the most foundational idea, I think everybody here already knows this. I don't need to say this, maybe, but I'll say it anyway, right? Buddhism is about alleviating suffering. And whenever you ask Buddhists what kind of suffering, what is suffering, what kinds of suffering are there, right? It's always four, right? What are the four? Birth, aging, sickness, and death, right? So sickness is included. Every Buddhist you ask, right? What are the forms of suffering that human beings have to endure? Illness, sickness is always on the list, right? And Buddhism always says that Buddhism's about alleviating suffering. So if Buddhism's about alleviating suffering, Buddhism must have something to say about illness. It must. It has to. Has to say something, right? So sometimes what Buddhism has to say about the suffering of illness is you should be equanimous with the suffering of illness, right? Sometimes it's that kind of advice, right? But sometimes Buddhism has more practical advice. You should do this and this and this to alleviate your illness, right? So sometimes it's more kind of detachment, equanimity, but sometimes it's very practical, you know? Take these herbs, do these things, yeah? So another just very, very, very basic, very foundational idea within Buddhism about health is that there are certain kinds of contemplation practices that can help with health. So now today, is mindfulness like super, super popular in Singapore? It's super popular in the United States. It's super popular around the world. It must be popular here too, right? And mindfulness is good for anxiety, good for stress, good for all kinds of mental health, right? Everybody's talking about that now. So yes, mindfulness, yes, that's included here. But many other kinds of contemplation practices also. From different Buddhist traditions around the world, they have identified different kinds of practices. Sometimes it's listening to the Dharma. Sometimes it's doing different kinds of meditation, visualization, sometimes different kinds of contemplation practices. But we can say, generally speaking, this is a foundational Buddhist idea there from the very beginning, that somehow involving the mind in certain ways, certain kinds of activities can be good for your health. I guess the opposite is true too. Involving your mind in unhealthy activities, right, can lead to illness. That's a kind of the other side of that. Okay, so another very common thing in Buddhist literature, Buddhist stories, Buddhist narratives, Buddhist similes. Similes are like metaphors, right? Is again and again and again they involve medicine. They involve healing. You must know some of these. The Buddha is the great doctor, right? The Dharma is the great medicine, right? There's stories about the Buddha. There are various Buddhist figures healing other people. There's stories about the Buddha's doctor, right? Jivaka. There's stories about various different kinds of monks, famous monks from throughout history, Buddhist history, doing healings and so forth, right? So there's a lot of stories. There's a lot of literature and narratives about healing. It's a very important part of Buddhist storytelling, of Buddhist literature. Actually, when I first started my research, I thought, oh, Buddhist medicine, it would probably be a small topic. And then I started researching and realized how much material there, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of Buddhist material about health, about medicine. A lot of it is stories like that. And then something else that's very, very foundational to Buddhist, Buddhist engagement with medicine is how much medicine there is in the Vinayas, the monastic codes, the codes that regulate the monastics' lives, whether they're monks or nuns. They have rules, they have disciplinary, practices. There's certain ways that you have to live and certain things you have to do. And every one of the vinyas that we have 5 from different traditions. Every one of them has a section on health and medicine. And every one of them has rules on how to store medicine, when you should take medicine, what kinds of medicine you can take, which kinds you can't. It's a whole tradition around that. So there's a lot of material there that tells us that monastics were, even 2,000 years ago, were very involved with medicine. They had medical knowledge of various types. And then finally, early Buddhism, we're talking about Pali and Sanskrit texts, right? And so when you look at the Pali and Sanskrit texts, they actually are filled with medical terminology. They talk about meditation on different parts of the body, and they use medical vocabulary from that time period. They talk about, different procedures, different kinds of medicines that you can keep and so forth. And they use anatomical terms and terms, specialists' terms that you will also find in the ancient Indian medical texts, right? So the people that are writing the Buddhist texts are familiar with the latest cutting edge modern medicine of their time, right? And they're writing using those words and those concepts. So so medicine is everywhere in Buddhism, even from the earliest time period. Right? And then, like I said, it becomes even more central moving to the Mahayana, even more central moving into Vajrayana. So you get more and more and more materials as time goes by. Okay, so this slide, I'm going to put up 4 kind of core elements or ideas that you find across early Buddhism, Mahayana, Vajrayana, across the whole development of the whole thing, right? So first one, I think you all know this. I don't think I'm telling you anything new. I'm just saying, you know this. This is part of Buddhist medicine. I said, do you know what Buddhist medicine is? And you said no, but you know this, right? Buddhism teaches that the mind and the body are connected, right? And so as you practice the Dharma in certain ways, you transform your mind, it transforms your body. The two are connected together, right? That's a core idea throughout all forms of Buddhism. They all agree on that. All forms of Buddhism agree that awakening, enlightenment has a sort of an effect on the health of the individual person, and also that person can develop healing abilities, healing powers, right? And so sometimes those are stories about famous monks being able to heal people, right, by chanting something or something like that, right? Or it's about somebody having an awakening experience and suddenly their illness goes away, right? So there's a lot of stories like that. Something that all forms of Buddhism agree on is the importance of compassion and generosity, right? Dana, giving to alleviate suffering, right, of other people. And then the integration of medical care into the practice of the Dharma, that's what we've been talking about, becoming more and more significant over time, more and more central to the practice of the Dharma. Yeah, so these are kind of like core elements of Buddhist medicine. Do you remember earlier I said the first Thangka painting in the series from the Tibet is the Medicine Buddha? And he's supposedly the one who teaches the whole Tibetan medical tradition. This is that Thangka. So Medicine Buddha is in the middle. You can't see because it's very small from where you're sitting, but the Medicine Buddha is surrounded by the lineage of teachers. You have the gods, you have the arhats, you have the rishis, and the other devas and other beings that all together came together to preserve and to transmit the teachings, with the Medicine Buddha at the middle. Okay, so I'm going to give you another list. This is a quick, it's a long list, but we'll do it very quickly, of the shared repertoire of practices. So all forms of Buddhism all around the world that I've studied share a list of things that they do. It looks different. If you do this in Japan, you do this in Thailand, you do this in Philadelphia, you do this in Tibet, it looks different. But the main idea is the same. So how about for each one of these, you raise your hand if you've ever seen this or participated in this. That'll be helpful for me, because then I know what's happening in Singapore. Yeah? So sometimes Buddhists take herbal medicines. Of course, I mean, I don't mean you go somewhere else and take herbal medicines. I mean, there's like some herbal medicine happening in the temple, or there's some kind of, you're eating lunch, you're eating some food at the temple, and there's some kind of medicinal herbs in there, or there's some kind of drinks that the temple is serving that you share together. Anybody? This does not happen. Oh, this in Singapore? Yeah, okay. So this happens sometimes in Singapore. Dietary practices. So a lot of times Buddhist traditions that are vegetarian talk about the health benefits of vegetarian. Sometimes it's karma. Have good karma and you won't get sick. And sometimes it's like, these days it's about cholesterol and other kinds of, nutritional qualities, right? And then sometimes it's fasting. Oh, if you're sick, you should avoid food for a couple of days or for however long. Anybody? Yeah. Okay. This is yeah. Okay. So very often Buddhist communities have some kind of meditation that they do for health and well-being. We talked about this earlier, mindfulness, other visualizations, other kinds of things. Yeah. Okay. Emotional therapy. So there's the idea in most forms of Buddhism that I know, there's the idea that anger makes you sick, makes you unwell, makes you unhappy. And so we counter anger by doing compassion meditation, metta bhavana, or kindness meditation, or spreading compassion. Is there something like that here? Yeah, it's like if you feel anxious, you should do this. If you feel angry, you should do this, right? Balance your emotions so that you're more positive emotions, yeah? So a couple of people, good. Okay, how about this? Have you ever chanted scripture, like chanted a sutra for health purposes? Yeah, okay. And then chanting dharanis, yeah, chanting torani, yeah, for health. Chanting mantras, chanting just names of Buddhas, yeah, names of bodhisattvas for health. Yeah, you do that? Okay. So a lot of Buddhist medicine in Singapore, I see. Invocation of healing deities. This is we're not just chanting the name of the Buddha or the name of the Bodhisattva. We're not just chanting the name, but we're invoking the presence, the power of the Bodhisattva to be here in the space. Yeah? We need Guan Yin to come here. We're not just saying Guan Yin's name, we want Guan Yin to come, to somehow bring Guan Yin here so that Guan Yin can be present in the community with us. Does that happen in Singapore? Yeah. Okay. Maybe not Guan Yin, maybe other, must be Guan Yin too, right? It's usually Guan Yin Temple, yeah, I know. So usually Guan Yin is very common for this kind of invocation. Yeah. So when you invoke, when you bring Guan Yin into the space, when you bring the Bodhisattva into the space, you can empower objects with the blessings of the Bodhisattva, and then those blessings can be used for healing. So specifically for healing. So do you have water? Guan Yin comes into the altar and then you drink the water to become healthy? Blessed water, yep. Yeah. Water, beads. And then you wear them so that they protect you. Yeah. Or maybe food. that you eat. Yeah, sometimes. So some kind of empowerment of objects, right? So we're gonna invoke Guan Yin into the space, or we invoke the Bodhisattva into the space, and then we hold the power in an object, and then we can use that object for healing. So sometimes there's healers, maybe there's healers here, I don't know, who have special objects that are especially empowered, and then they can kind of heal you with that. So in Thailand, they do this with water all the time. The monks take a brush and they put it into the water and they go, yeah? Do they do that in Singapore? Yeah. Yeah, Thai temples, yeah, yeah. Not here though. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Something like this, right? And then that's for like blessing but for healing purposes, yeah? Okay. So talismans, amulets. Right? You're wearing an amulet right there. I see an amulet, yeah. So amulets, talismans, things that you put on your body, yeah, in order to protect you, in order to heal you. Maybe you hang them in the space, you put them on the walls, you put them in different places for healing purposes. Yeah, yeah, for healing purposes. You do this here, yeah? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, how about ghosts and spirits and so forth? So in most Buddhist countries and most Buddhist cultures, there's some kind of belief or some kind of idea about being able to get rid of illness, get rid of sickness, get rid of disease-causing spirits, that you have some kind of rituals that you do in order to remove them from the space or from the person, right? So the person's sick, person has an illness, it's not getting better, it's not being treated through regular medicine, they go to a healer of some kind and they do this kind of ritual practice to get the spirit out. Do you have this in Buddhism in Singapore? A little bit, sometimes? When I used to live in Thailand, there were many people came up from Singapore to Thailand. And they came to my teachers and my people that I was living with in Thailand, and then they came up and they had these things done. So maybe you don't do it in Singapore, you go to Thailand to do it. Okay. And then many Buddhist cultures have binding. In Thailand, Sri Lanka, China, this is usually string around the wrist. Yeah, you have some blessing, you want to attach it to your body. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, hold yours up. Yeah, you some blessing you attach to your body to keep the blessing with you. Yeah, you hold the blessing to yourself, binding it to yourself. Yeah, do you do this in Singapore? Yeah, okay, okay. And then the last one I have is rituals to clean out your karma, right? So illness being caused by karma, you want to wash the karma away through different kinds of rituals. So sometimes there's in Thailand they wash it with water. They do like a water ceremony to pour water to clean your karma. Sometimes it's some kind of visualization, some other kind of ritual. The details are different, but the idea is there. I think quite common. The problem is the reason I'm sick is because I have some bad karma, and I need to fix that. I have to do something to cleanse that. Sometimes it's a confession ritual, repentance ritual, cleansing ritual. Do you do this in Singapore? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of Buddhist medicine happening in Singapore. A lot of what I would call Buddhist medicine. You don't have to call it Buddhist medicine, but when I look at if I was to stay here longer and get to know you more and get to participate in some of these practices that you do as a community, I think I would see a lot of similarities. It's not the same. It's not exactly the same as in Thailand or Tibet or in Japan, but there's some similar ideas, similar theories, similar ideas behind the practices. Yeah. So for me, I think we can talk about this as being related, like Buddhist art. Yeah. What you do is not exactly the same as what they do somewhere else, but it's kind of in the same family. It's in the same kind of neighborhood. Yeah. As other Buddhist traditions. Okay. This I'll just do quickly. I'm a historian. I study history. I was just asking you about your own practice today. But what I look at is historical materials to try to understand what communities were doing 500, 1,000, 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago. What were communities doing? They were doing all of these same things, all the same things I just talked about. They had all of these ideas. You know, these Buddhist medical core ideas and practices have been there for 2,000 years. And how do we know this? Well, we can look at the Buddhist texts, we can look at the sutras, we can look at the commentaries, we can look at the materials that were written, Pali, Sanskrit, Chinese, Tibetan. They give us a lot of this information there. But it's not only, so it's not only the Buddhist texts themselves, like the sutras and so forth, but also the kinds of narratives that are being written in other places. Like in the Chinese example, there's lots of stories that were written down by elite people, literati people, the aristocracy, the gentry in Chinese history. They wrote lots of stories, lots of poems, lots of kind of accounts of Buddhist monks doing this, that, and the other, right? So there's both the internal materials inside the Buddhist tradition and then the outside materials from outside the Buddhist tradition telling us that what was happening at that time. The other thing I look at, I'm very interested in practitioners who was practicing Buddhist medicine, and it turns out they're often organized into lineages, so teachers and students, right? So in Tibet, I showed you that mandala with the lineage, right, of the devas and the human teachers and the bodhisattvas and so forth, right? So in Tibet, that's how they imagine it. In Thailand, where I lived, it was manuscripts. You got to copy the manuscripts from your teacher, and then you had those manuscripts, and then your students would copy those manuscripts, and then there's a lineage created that way. So how the lineage works is different from place to place, but historically we have these lineages that wrote these texts down, and they talked about their teachers and their students. We also have institutions. So I showed you pictures of the hospitals in the Khmer Empire, right? There's hospitals built in China. There's hospitals built in Sri Lanka, right? We have all over in Japan, all over Asia, we have institutions where Buddhist medicine was being practiced, and we have archaeological evidence of these places, right? We can see these places still there. And then finally, speaking of evidence, archaeological evidence, objects, we have material culture and iconography. That's a very fancy scholarly way to say 东西, just stuff, right? So we have 东西 from people all over Asia, right? We have all of this like stuff, right? We have statues, we have old medicines, dried up herbs found inside in some pouch, right? In some museum in Japan. We have all kinds of different objects from all over Asia that tell us something about these practices, right? So we have texts, and then we have all of this other stuff that we can work with as historians. Okay, so that's kind of the shared body of knowledge and practices, right? The kind of what's shared by all Buddhist traditions. That's me kind of combining things together and showing you how they're similar, how they're the same. Now I'm going to separate things and show you how they're different. Yeah. Of course, they're different in every place. Singapore is different than China, is different than Taiwan, is different from Japan, which is different, right? They're different in each place. But I told you before, there's kind of like some families, some similarities that I think are worth mentioning. So I talk about there being three historical trajectories, historical processes in history in the last 1,000 years, last 700 years or so. So in some places, Buddhism was replaced by Hinduism or Islam. And Buddhism is no longer really practiced there. Right? That happened during the last millennium, or sometimes it was earlier, a little bit earlier. But Buddhism was extremely popular, extremely important. Places like Afghanistan, places like Indonesia, right? And then it then became less so, and then it kind of disappeared from those places. But you know what's interesting is that some of the medical practices, the Buddhist medical practices, didn't go away. The medical practices stayed, and they just kind of changed the name of the Buddha to somebody else. The practice is exactly the same, right? So this is one of the chapters in the anthology that I think is really interesting. The project where I had all my friends come together and translate stuff. One of them is translated by an Indian scholar who was translating an Indian Muslim healing ritual. And it says, you know, Allah, this, that, the other, but it's Buddhist. All the mantras, right? All the dharani, they're all Buddhist. So it's like Buddhist medicine went kind of like underground, secret, you know? It stayed. It just got it became reframed, right? Either in a Hindu way, Muslim way, Christian way maybe, but it stayed and continued to be practiced. It's interesting. There's also mandalas, Buddhist mandalas, that then all the Buddhist features get replaced with Arabic writing. Same diagram, just now reframed. I've collected pictures of these. I don't have them for you here, but I've collected some pictures of these things. It's very interesting. So other parts of Asia, East Asia, for the most part, Buddhist medicine travels, or Buddhism travels. Buddhism is spread to these areas. Buddhist medicine, medical ideas from India, all the stuff we've been talking about right now, just a minute ago, all of those practices that you all say you do here, they're done in East Asia. But when they talk about why it works, why does the ritual work? In this part of Asia, they say it's because of qi. It's because of yin yang. It's because of wu xing. They use Chinese language, right? Or they say the same thing, but using Japanese or Korean or Vietnamese. They explain why this works using East Asian ideas, right? So they have all the practices, but they use East Asian language to explain why it works. That's different than the other part of Asia. This part of Asia, so Mongolia, Tibet, Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka. In this part of Asia, you ask them why those same things work. Why does these things work? And they will talk about Indian medicine ideas. They'll talk about Mahabhuta, earth, water, fire, wind. They'll talk about the dosha, wind, bile, phlegm. These are all Indian concepts, right? So same rituals, same practices, same ideas, but why does it work? You have in one part of Asia using East Asian ideas, one part of Asia using Indian ideas. In some places, like Tibet, for example, they kind of mix a little bit of Chinese ideas into the Indian ideas also. So there's a little bit of a mix there, right? So you could say there's one part of Asia is more Chinese language focused, another part of Asia is more Sanskrit language focused, right? That's another way of saying that. So people differ about how they explain why this works, but the practices are the same. Still doing the same practices. Of course, the practices look a little bit different from place to place, but the fundamental shared repertoire is similar everywhere, but people explain it differently. I think Buddhist art is just like that. You can look at a Buddhist art and you can a Buddhist statue and you can say if that came from East Asia or South Asia, right? it's the Buddha, but this one looks like it came from India, and this one looks like it came from Thailand or Cambodia, and this one looks like it came from China or Japan, right? It's the Buddha, but looks a little different, right? So it's kind of like that. You have Buddhist medicine looks a little bit different. It looks a little bit more Sanskrit, or it looks a little bit more Chinese. So I have a question for you. Singapore is interesting. You're in a part of Asia that's predominantly Buddhism is not practiced now, right? Like Malaysia, Indonesia, this region was very important in Buddhist history, but recently has become part of this red area where Buddhism isn't the primary tradition in Malaysia and Indonesia. But here in Singapore, I think it's quite important. So I'm curious. Yeah. So for you all, when you think about why some medicines that you take, or some ritual that you do, or some dharani that you chant, or something like that, when you think about why this works, do you use Chinese words or Sanskrit words? It's mixed. Yeah, I knew it. Everything's Loja here. I can't order a coffee without having to know two or three different languages, right? Yeah. Yeah. So Singapore's interesting, I think. Yeah. It's interesting. This layers of tradition here, I think it's a special case. I want to learn more. Yeah. Okay. So I'll talk quickly about the modernization and globalization, because what I've been talking about so far is history, pre-modern history. So in the modern period, how has Buddhist medicine changed in the last 100 years or so? Well, maybe 200 years. So I think here in Singapore, I don't have to explain that much of Asia was colonized by European powers in the last couple hundred years, and that Buddhism, like other Asian traditions, was largely repressed, suppressed, replaced, sometimes forcibly, by Western traditions, right? Christianity and secular science and medicine and so forth, right? Buddhism, all over. I'm sure that it was the case here too. Although I don't know, I'm sure it was the case here too. That Buddhism was treated as something being superstitious and backwards and old and not modern during the 18th century. And then there was a movement. I know the movement in China, in Japan, in other parts of Asia. I don't know about the movement here in Singapore, but there was a movement beginning around the beginning of the 20th century to modernize Buddhism, and people started to make the argument at that time. They started to argue that no, actually Buddhism is modern. Actually, Buddhism is not superstitious, it's modern. One of the ways they made that argument is to say, actually, the Buddha was a psychologist. The Buddha was a scientist. The Buddha knew about mental health. The Buddha knew about all kinds of modern ideas, right? That's one way people kind of reinterpreted tradition as being modern. And Buddhist medicine is an important part of that story, because one of the main ways that Buddhists argued that Buddhism is actually modern, Buddhism is not superstitious, is by turning Buddhism into a form of wellness, a form of well-being. And that kind of peaked in the 1970s so it began much earlier in places like Myanmar, Japan. I don't know about Singapore. But it became an international movement. And by the 1970s, you had psychologists, psychiatrists, neuroscientists, people in the biomedical and scientific fields actually agreeing Buddhism is good for your health. And starting to study that scientifically and creating protocols like MBSR and MBCT so that they could do clinical trials, and also hooking monks up to brain scanners and things like this in order to study the beneficial effects of meditation, right, from a scientific point of view. So today, there are a number of course, there's many local organizations, many local temples, many hundreds, thousands of ways that Buddhist medicine is being practiced locally. But I want to draw attention to some large transnational organizations, Buddhist organizations that are involved with Buddhist medicine internationally. And what they're doing is different. They look different from one another. So one example is Suji. I know there's a Suji here in Singapore. I don't know what they do. But in Taiwan, they have hospitals, and these hospitals are modern scientific biomedical hospitals. Where I live in Philadelphia, they have small clinics. They're not hospitals, they're clinics. And they mostly do Zhongyi, they do Chinese medicine. This is what they do here, Chinese medicine? Community outreach, yeah, this is more like what it's like in Philadelphia. So in Taiwan, they have these huge hospitals, big hospitals. So this is an organization that does, some places it does biomedicine, some places it does Chinese medicine, some places it does community outreach, right? It does different things in different countries. But why are they doing it? They're doing it because it's part of their Renjian Fojiao, right? Their humanistic Buddhism, right? Another organization is similar is the Wangguang. Another organization is similar is the Wangguang. The Won Buddhism in Korea. I don't know if they're here in Singapore. Maybe I don't know how many Koreans live here in Singapore. I don't know, but Won Buddhism is in Korea. A very they have many hospitals. They're all traditional medicine hospitals, Korean medicine, similar to Chinese medicine hospitals. And they also have acupuncture school in my town, in Philadelphia. It's actually the biggest acupuncture school anywhere in the region is owned by this Buddhist organization. So again, these are international organizations that promote some connection, some combination of Buddhism and medicine abroad. Yeah, and I know that there are organizations locally here in Singapore that do this too, because my friend Michael and we were wandering around yesterday and we went to visit some of these here, Buddhist wellness centers or something like this. Yeah, Buddhist, yeah. So there are organizations like that here. They're kind of Buddhist medical clinics of some kind. Yeah. So we have this kind of modernization, right? So we have many different kinds of organizations out there doing all kinds of different things. But I like to talk about them together. I want to study them together. I want to kind of understand how they're different examples of something similar. Okay, why am I so interested in talking about these things together? But I think most people were quite happy to talk about these things separately and not to think about them together like Buddhist art, right? They wanted to talk about Chinese art and Japanese art and Tibetan art and Thai art. But I said, no, let's talk about Buddhist art, right? So they wanted to talk about all of these things separately, but I want to bring them together. Why do I want to bring them together? Why do I think this Buddhist medicine is important? So I did my PhD in the history of medicine, remember? I did my PhD at Johns Hopkins University Medical School. Maybe you heard about it, I don't know. It's supposed to be the top medical school in the United States. It thinks it's the top medical school in the world. And I was in the history of medicine department, and we did a 1-year course in the history of medicine, the whole history of medicine. And this is what we learned. We started with the ancient period of Greco-Roman medicine, of Greek medicine with Hippocrates. We talked about Galen, which is in the Roman period. We talked about Ayurveda. We talked about classical Chinese medicine. There was a whole thing about Islamic medicine and how European medicine was translated into Arabic and continued in the Middle East and then was translated back into Latin. I don't know if you know anything about history of medicine, but that's an important period of time. We talked about colonial medicine, the repression of traditional medicines around Asia. We talked about the revival of those Asian medicines. We talked about modern biomedicine. We did not talk about Buddhism. We didn't talk about Buddhism at all. But it turns out, if you think in terms of Buddhist medicine, if you use that term, suddenly Buddhism becomes absolutely central to the history of medicine globally. Because Indian medicine was translated in Buddhist texts and spread all over Asia and became the basis for traditional medicine in Mongolia, Tibet, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, parts of Vietnam, Sri Lanka. It was very, very important in medieval China, Tang Dynasty China, super important in that time period in East Asia as well, and is still practiced all over Asia. And now it's being introduced to the West through mindfulness and through immigration from Asia to my city and cities all over the West, and has now become global in its popularity. From my perspective, it turns out Buddhism is the biggest ignored story in the history of medicine globally. And that's what I've spent the last 30 years arguing in my field, in the history of medicine. I spent the last 30 years telling people you've missed the biggest story in the history of Asian medicine. Why did you miss it? Because you thought it was just Buddhism. Right? You thought it was just religion. You thought it was just something that you could ignore because it didn't fit into your ideas. So by using this term Buddhist medicine, I want to change this story, and I want Johns Hopkins Medical School to teach Buddhist medicine as part of the curriculum. It does now. It's part of the curriculum. Number two, different reason. A reason I think is also important to think about Buddhist medicine as a thing is because I'm sure it's different here. But in my country, when you talk to people about Buddhism and health, they only think about mindfulness. That's the only thing anybody thinks about is mindfulness. And I think what I showed earlier on is there's a huge story there about so many more things than just mindfulness. Mindfulness is part of it, but there's so many other things, right? You all raised your hand about so many other things that you do in a Buddhist community that has to do with health. And then I talked about those health fairs that they do at the temples and how important temples are and people to gain access to healthcare and so forth. It's so much more than just mindfulness, right? I'm a little bit tired about mindfulness, I'm sorry. It's just all that you hear in where I live. It's the only thing anybody thinks about. So if you can think about Buddhist medicine, and mindfulness is one modality in Buddhist medicine, but there's all these other things happening. I think it helps to open the mind a little bit about what's going on. And then part of the reason that we can open our minds and maybe understand more about the wide range of things that Buddhists think are important about health is because these are really, I think, extremely valuable cultural traditions that have been practiced for 2,000 years or 2,500 years, that are being practiced all over the world in different ways, but are being practiced in communities, like this one, like other communities. And I think there's so much wisdom there, so much importance there, and that if we can give it a name, we can call it Buddhist medicine, and maybe it becomes a thing that people are interested in studying more, that people are interested in preserving more, people are interested in investigating more, right? So now we plug monks into brain scanners when they do meditation, but how about when they do Guanyin invocation? Eh? How about when you're giving charity, right? There's so many other ways that Buddhism is good for you, good for your health, right? There's so many other ways, and we can kind of celebrate those ways and investigate those ways. We don't have to investigate them scientifically. We don't have to, but we can honor them and cherish them and realize how important they are. Okay, so that's my argument, my case. I've presented my case. So I like to have very open-ended conversation, very open-ended Q&A. You can ask me about anything, even if it wasn't in my presentation. If I'm able to have something smart to say, I will tell you about it. There's many things I don't know, but I'm a scholar, and so. Hello. Oh, okay. Yeah. Maybe I turned it up. Oh no, it's the battery. Yeah. Let me just. Yeah. So I'm a scholar. So when I don't know something, I should admit it. I should tell you I don't know. But then the other thing I do, because I'm a scholar, is I like to give homework assignments. So if you ask me a question, I might say, "Oh, there's a good book about this. I'll send you I'll send you the title, send you an article, send you a PDF you can read." Yeah. So I might do this too. But yeah, I welcome your questions and your comments. And do you want to say something or no? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Salguero. I mean, yeah, we're just going to open the floor, but just wanted to say, such a fascinating talk. I think you all agree with me, right? I mean, it's just so much to unpack right here. And yeah, maybe one day we will have Singaporean Buddhist representation in, the annals of Buddhism and medicine like that, right? And also, I just thought that an important foundational point would be, I mean, the very first metaphor of the Buddha as doctor, right? I mean, like, there is the entire tradition. I think it runs through all our Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana traditions, right? I mean, like with the Buddha as doctor, the Dharma as medicine, and the Sangha as like medical personnel, right? Like, I'm reminded of like Ajahn Brahms when he was sharing, right? Like he famously he quipped about how we can respond to anyone who say pressures us to consume alcohol by saying that, oh, it's doctor's advice that we shouldn't, because the Buddha is the ultimate doctor, right? I mean, like that. I mean, that's the joke, right? But there is truth in that, and I think that's something that is important too, right? So, I mean, immediate question that just came to me, and just before we open up to questions, I was thinking about money pills. Yeah, like which links to the herbal medicine point, right? Because I was just wondering about to what extent is that. Thank you. Yeah, to what extent is that a placebo effect? Or because the context is I went to Dharamsala, right, to attend the teachings of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and then they were providing money pills, right? I remember like when I got these, my family, I mean, my mom was asking like, "Are you sure you should take that? And is it safe or not?" Yeah, right. I mean, which is a very legitimate question, right? I mean, to when wondering where do these strange pills come from, right? And I mean, my family, the Buddhist too, so it's not a religious thing. It's also what's the provenance of it? I mean, there's a lot of I mean, there's still so much we don't know. But then I was like, no, I mean, like, it's blessed, you know? I mean, like, I'm going to take it. And then at first, like, I remember yeah, long story, but basically, for me, it worked, at least. Yeah, so that was the context. I'm wondering how, to what extent is that a placebo effect, or is there something to it that's more to it than meets the eye, right? In that. Yeah. Good. So, I mean, maybe Prof.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so I actually just wrote something about placebo effect. So this maybe I can share what my thoughts are about placebo effect. So placebo effect, I think, is the name that we give to every effect that medicine has that cannot be measured with biomedical science at the moment. We call it placebo effect. And when we call it placebo effect, usually what we're doing is dismissing it. We're controlling for placebo effect, right? Placebo effect means but I think differently. And I think differently because I learned this from Buddhism. What I learned from Buddhism is that the mind and the body are connected. And I learned that wholesome, skillful, positive thinking, it has the healing effect, right? And I learned from Buddhism that there are many different ways to produce positive emotions and feelings and mental states. And so when I look at something like money pills, like money pills are made with all kinds of herbal medicines, but then they have all kinds of blessings and all kinds of rituals and all kinds of visualizations and all kinds of prayer and all kinds of imagery, and they're made in special places, and then you go to special places and take them, right? They come in special boxes with special talismans on them and so forth, right? There's so much packed into that one medicine that we can dismiss it all and say it's all placebo effect. Sure. Or we can say it's very skillful mobilization of positive mental and emotional qualities to do with this medicine when you take it. Right? I learned that from Buddhism. I learned that that's what's happening with all of this. It's not, it's just placebo effect. It's like, it's a very skillful mobilization of both mind and body, emotional, mental, physical, all at the same time. Does that make sense? So
yes,
maybe it's placebo effect, but it's very skillful if it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's so much more to that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In fact, that trip was yeah. Okay, I'm just going to pass over, but just want to credit Brother William as well. And I remember when that. Okay. Yes.
I have a question. So you're talking about how Buddhism influenced all the traditional Asian cultures, right? So in an era where people like to count, right, are you able to say, okay, Buddhism represented, a quarter or a third or a certain percentage of all these concepts in Chinese medicine, for example? Have people ever been able to come up with estimates like that? And then the other thing I wanted to remark is that one of the new trends in medicine that's pretty hot is longevity. And I think the whole Buddhist tradition of healthy eating and healthy mind and being in a nice community, I think that is a super valuable contribution to make to that new frontier.
Yeah, great. Although my friend Professor Stanley Baker here, he studies Taoist medicine, and they live forever, right? So, in Buddhists, we keep dying and being reborn, but they live forever. But, yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of very, very skillful, very wise advice within Buddhist traditions that would definitely have a lot to say about longevity, a lot to say about not only lifespan but health span, how long you're healthy for, right? And I think these are areas that we can study if we think about Buddhist medicine. If we have a new kind of understanding that these practices are all connected with one another, then we can start to explore and compare different populations and different cultures and see how Buddhism plays a role in longevity. Do Buddhists live longer? I don't know. But I think I think these are some questions that are worth studying. Then your question about the influence of Buddhism on Chinese medicine specifically. So Buddhist influence on Zhongyi. That is part of the research that I did on the introduction of Buddhist medicine into China. And what I learned doing that research is that Indian medical ideas were very important in China in the Tang Dynasty. Indian medical ideas. So people talked about, they used Sanskrit terms to talk about health and well-being. And some of the Chinese doctors, the most famous Chinese doctors from that period, like Sun Tzu Miao and Chao Yuanfeng, these people who are well known for their writings in that time period, they wrote about Sanskrit Buddhist ideas. The same in Japan, Ishinpo, and in Korea, the Dongui Bogam. These are very important texts from around East Asia, all done in the medieval period. And they all talked about Sanskrit terms. These were important terms. But in the Song Dynasty in China, there was kind of a rebirth of classical medicine. And there was an effort to erase the foreigners' stuff, right? The foreign religions, foreign practices were kind of marginalized. And during that time period, it seems like Buddhist impact on Chinese medicine was diminished. So most scholars that talk about this have found actually very little influence on Chinese medicine because of this. But we have one colleague who just recently has been publishing some studies where he's arguing that actually there's some secret underground kind of influences on Chinese medicine, and maybe there's more influence than we think. But I would say that's kind of new research that's coming out now. So on the whole, I think in Chinese medicine in particular, Buddhism has less influence, although they're doing all the same practices in Chinese cultures. They just are thinking in terms of qi and yin yang and wuxing. Right? And that's different than in Thailand, where they're using Sanskrit ideas. Yeah. So you said percentage, 2%, 3%, but our colleague will say maybe like 6%. Yeah. So small influence. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, floor is open. Okay, right. I'm just hitting over.
Hello. I have two questions. The first one is more, I guess, like when conducting research, I'm just wondering how difficult it would be to understand the modern era of Buddhist medicine, because I think probably in at least the Singapore context, maybe we don't consider it medicine. So one example I can think of is like tiger balm. But I don't think most people would consider tiger balm as like medicine. It's more of just like ointment. So yeah, I'm wondering how difficult research would be in that sense. An example off the top of my head would be Korean skincare. I think only recently when they started marketing to global audiences, they really started to talk about the anti-inflammatory, the soothing properties of certain ingredients, but I don't know if they would consider that medicinal. Yeah, so that's the first question. The second question has to do with mindfulness. I know that you mentioned you are not very interested in it, but I was wondering if you're interested in criticizing it.
No, I am very interested in it. I just making a joke. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's a bit out of the scope of this presentation, but there's a book, Mindfulness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have any views on that, given your background.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So this book, Mindfulness, is written by my friend Ron Purser. Ron Purser is a business scholar of business and marketing, business practices in the U.S. And what he argued essentially is that the way that mindfulness is being marketed in the United States is a model that came from fast food. So the name of the book is Mindfulness. Yeah. So it's an argument about the kind of the marketing strategies. He's Buddhist, so he's not happy about this situation, and his book is very kind of like angry. He's saying that this whole mindfulness thing is like just a big watering down of the Dharma, and it's just like a terrible thing. I know a lot of Buddhists that feel the same way, but I also know Buddhists that disagree. Because I talk to a lot of Buddhists who talk about the mindfulness being a faman, a dharma door, faman, yeah. The more people practice mindfulness, even if they learn it from mindfulness, it doesn't matter because they'll maybe discover the Dharma that way. So I can see maybe both arguments, right? I can see why Buddhists would say, "Oh, this mindfulness thing is so stupid," and then I can also see why they would say, "No, this is great." But Ron Purser thinks it's a terrible thing.
Thank you very much for bringing refreshing.
Yeah. Sorry. Sorry about the journal, but I mean, just wondering whether the earlier point was
The
there
skincare point.
that
Yeah.
skincare.
Yeah. Let me do that.
We'll get to you after.
Yeah. This is I like this question a lot. I when I first was a graduate student and I said I was going to study Buddhist medicine, this very grouchy old professor in my department, who everybody was very scared of, he said, "Piers, this is not medicine. We're at Johns Hopkins in the history of medicine department. You can't do this study. This study's about religion." So I said to him, I said, "What is your definition of medicine?" And he said, "Well, for it to be medicine," his name was Harry Marx, and he had the Marx matrix. For it to count as medicine, it had to satisfy 4 things. See if I remember them. It had to be formalized into written doctrines that were standardized, systematized. And I said, "Oh, check. We have the sutras, we have these theories, they're formalized, right? They're written down. Check." He said it has to be institutionalized. Has to be practiced within certain institutions, that are recognized as being specialist institutions. I was like, okay, check. He said there has to be practitioners who have certain types of formalized training, standardized kind of training. You need to have, a recognized way of passing this knowledge down from one specialist to another. Check. And then there was something about the patient-doctor relationship, that people had to come to these specialists and submit themselves to the authority of the specialization, submit themselves to the authority of this therapy in order to receive the therapy, right? There has to be this power dynamic. Check. So my second year in graduate school, we had this test we all had to pass in order to stay in the program. We got kicked out of the program if we didn't do this. We had to present a paper at the formal colloquium in front of all the faculty, and they.
Let me just check. This is not censorship. Yes.
No, I'm talking too much. They want me to leave now.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so we had this the second year, the end of the second year, we had to take this. We had to present to the colloquium, the formal colloquium, where all the professors were going to ask us hard questions, and they were going to, really try to challenge us. And I presented my paper that year on exorcism of ghosts and spirits and why that satisfied the Marx matrix. So I took the thing that he would hate the most and the thing that he would argue was definitely not medicine. And I made the argument at that presentation that it satisfied the Marx matrix. And I passed. So for me, the word for me, the word medicine, right? The word medicine is a gatekeeping word. It's a word that people use to exclude practices that they don't think are legitimate. Right? We have medicine, you have healing. Right? And so I've spent my whole career, my whole scholarly career, talking about Buddhist medicine for that reason. But I understand what you're saying. Maybe not all of it. Maybe Korean skincare is maybe a different case, right? Because sometimes people like to medicalize a practice in order to make it more legitimate. But I don't think that's happening in the case of Buddhist medicine. I don't think this is an example of medicalizing something to make it sound legitimate. Maybe a little bit with mindfulness, but No, I think it's legitimate. I think Buddhist medicine is a legitimate form of medicine globally, historically, because it satisfies the Marx matrix, and it has all across Asia for 2,000 years. Yeah. Yeah.
Just nod it after that. Okay.
Sorry, Prof. In relation to the rise of mindfulness, there is also increasing anecdotes about the meditative illness, 禅病. Right? So you have been researching on 智子大师, right? 子怡, and then you write commentaries on the book Samatha. So I would like to know your view, how these Chinese canons, right? I mean, commentaries from 智子大师 can be applied in a modern context in terms of meditation illness, especially when we know Buddhism is more than that. We have a somatic experience. We have also retributive, right, karmic implications in terms of healing, right?
Yeah, good,
Thanks.
good. Could you hear him in the back? Yeah, the question is about 禅病, right? Meditation sickness or meditation illness. And I don't know if you know this, but this is my current research project right now. I just in the last 2 years have shifted over to researching this project, this topic. I spent enough time studying how Buddhism makes you well. Now I'm interested in how Buddhism makes you sick. No, just joking. Yeah, so this is maybe it's a topic that maybe I'll talk. Maybe I have too much to say, and we can maybe continue later. Maybe I'll next time I'm in Singapore, I'll come back. But yeah, so I will say, I guess that so the medical professionals who have been studying mindfulness and other forms of meditation, who have been doing the clinical research on this, have decided that some percentage of practitioners will have what they call meditation-related adverse effects. It's a kind of a medical term for when you do meditation and you have a bad experience. And sometimes that can be very serious. Sometimes it's just you feel a little bit more stressed, but you thought you would have less stress, but you feel more stress. Sometimes it can be more serious. People have serious mental health conditions that have serious problems. So they have decided now that meditation can make you sick, right? And I started to hear these presentations from these researchers, and I thought to myself, well, you know, Buddhists have known about Chanping for 1,500 years at least. Buddhist communities all over Asia talk about being careful with meditation practices and needing to balance and needing to, be skillful about how you approach it and not overdo it and have good guidance. I mean, Buddhist communities know this, and have known this for a very long time. So what I noticed in America is that we have these researchers who are making this argument about meditation-related adverse effects, and then we have Western Buddhists, English-speaking Western Buddhists, that are arguing, no, meditation can't make you sick. It can't be. It must be your problem. It must be your teacher doesn't know what they're doing. It can't make you sick. And what I noticed is everybody's arguing in English, and nobody's actually asking the Buddhist tradition. Nobody's actually checking the texts. Nobody's actually doing any kind of interviews of people in Asia or, traditional communities that have these traditions. Nobody's actually asking. They're just talking in English to each other. So I did what I do best. What I do best. I'm famous among my colleagues in the scholarly world. What I'm famous for is gathering together a bunch of people to go do some translations. Because you remember 96 people that came together to do that project? So I did it again. And I collected, this time only 25 scholars, so it's fewer. But I have 25 colleagues that have translated Buddhist texts from Pali, Sanskrit, Tibetan, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, from Myanmar, from all over, not from Singapore. They've translated texts from all over, from 2,500 years ago all the way to the present, interviews with monastics, with doctors, with teachers, all Asian cultures except for Singapore, all of these different languages. We put together an anthology, a collection. It's going to be published in April, so not too long. And the whole point of it is to show that Buddhists have known about this for 1,500 years and have a lot to say, a lot of really important ideas about how to regulate meditation, how to safely engage with meditation, how to balance things when things go wrong, how to know when things are going wrong, how to treat when things go wrong, how to address the problems. So I think it's again an area where scholars can help to translate the material from the Buddhist world and make it available, in one place for people to be able to consult, for people to be able to read, to be able to compare, to be able to help, to learn more, to engage in this. And so the answer again is very similar to Buddhist medicine. It looks different in different places. Chanping in medieval China is different than Tibetan. In Tibetan they call it wind sickness, lung, right? In Thai they call it lom. It's something different. And in all these different cultures they have different ideas about it. But again, it's different opinions, different teachings, different kinds of ideas around a similar theme. So this is what I do best, is bring the source materials together so that we can then have an intelligent conversation where it's not just people talking in English to each other, but actually listening to the tradition and understanding what the tradition has to say about it. Yeah, so, yeah.
I was just thinking that's such important decolonial work as well, right? I mean, the translation. And there are new grants and funds available in Singapore for translation. So
Okay.
that's an idea. Yeah, maybe we could apply for that. Yeah, thank you.
Because you were talking about translation and you mentioned all the different countries. I was just quite curious why you didn't mention Bhutan,
Oh, yes.
and Bhutan being one of the countries that is
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many countries that I'm sure I missed more than just Bhutan when I was listing. But yes, Bhutan is represented in the anthologies that I made before. There's definitely a translation from Bhutan that's in the material. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I forgot when I was listing.
So just out of curiosity, because obviously Bhutan's religion came from Tibet, but
Yeah.
do you see a difference between Bhutan and Tibetan Buddhism in the context of medicine?
Yeah. Yes, I think they're part of the same tradition, but there are differences, right? It's like Theravada Buddhism in Thailand versus Laos. There's a lot of similarities, but there's also local differences. And I think Bhutan is an area of the Buddhist world that has had less research than Tibet, right? Just like Laos has had less research than Thailand, or like like Singapore has had no research that I know of. And I'm interested in hearing more from the countries that are underrepresented in the scholarship. That's one of the main things that I've been focused on for these anthologies, is trying to bring out more materials from places that are underrepresented. So it's important to me to include Bhutan in the mix. But it's difficult to find people who are scholars working in that area who are able to do translations. It's not easy to find. So sometimes I fail to find. Yeah. So sometimes I fail to find. I reach out to people and I fail to find them. Yeah. But
Okay.
so there is a German scholar named Mona Schrempf. Mona Schrempf is a specialist in Bhutanese Buddhist medicine, and she's published a number of things on it. So for me, I'm very reliant on the scholarship of other people to do work in languages that I don't read. So, which is most of the languages in Asia. So Mona Schrempf is the one person I know that's very active in Bhutan, anthropologist working on Buddhism and medicine in Bhutan. Anybody else? Did I forget somebody? She quit? She quit. She quit scholarship or quit Bhutan? Okay, all right. But she's got a lot of books and articles out there, so you could read her stuff that she published before. Yeah. Schrempf. Yeah, Schrempf. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Victor, and I teach Qigong, Tai Chi, and yoga. So I'm very much interested in understanding different kinds of healing modalities. So I'm just wondering, when you say Buddhist medicine, in your research, have you come across a formula? Like maybe, let's not look into Tibetan medicine, because that's indigenously very much developed by Buddhist idea. But like in Chinese medicine, have you come across a formula or something that is very much influenced by or indigenously Buddhist in any particular way, or that is maybe as a result of Buddhists from India coming into China and then influencing on any of these formulas of TCM? Yeah,
Like herbal formulas.
Yeah,
like
herbal formulas in TCM. I think that would be interesting for us to know. And I'm also raising my doubt on like indigenous Buddhist medicine per se, because we do know that a lot of times, even in Theravada Buddhism, there are certain things that was, I would say, approved by the Buddha, but they are Vedic traditions. So it didn't sort of like develop out indigenously from Buddhist idea. And then we also know that Ayurvedic text has been translated along passing into like Dunhuang manuscript. So I don't know, are you looking at that as also as a result, like certain thing that is Buddhist kind of thing, you know? And like when we discuss things like Sun Si Miao's idea, he's also a Taoist, so I'm not sure, like sometime, like even in Tiantai, we see in Tiantai Zhi Da's writing, he adopted some Ge Hong's idea from Taoist. So like how indigenously like Buddhist medicine can be really, you know, derive from your discussion. So I'm just raising a little bit of doubt here.
That's
so
good.
maybe you like to comment on that.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. Good. I told you scholars are happy when you disagree or you have a little. You have to have friction to sharpen your pencil, right? So thank you for the friction. So I think you're talking about the same thing I was talking about when I had the 3 different regions and I had the 3 different bubbles, the 3 different colors, right? I think you're talking about the same thing that I was saying. Where is it? Here. So in this part of Asia, in East Asia, Buddhist ideas bring Indian medicine into that part of Asia, but it's translated into Chinese terms. So you don't have the impact of Sanskrit medical ideas, right? Sanskrit, like Ayurvedic ideas, right? You don't have the impact in East Asia that those same ideas have in places like Thailand, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Tibet, right? In those places, when you ask Tibetans what is the core, what's the basis of the medicine, right? They will talk about the 5 elements, and they will talk about Indian concepts. Same in Thai, same in Myanmar, same in right. So in China, though, it's been translated. Buddhist practices, they do all the practices, but it's explained in Chinese concepts, right? So it's a different kind of reception in East Asia. It's more of Indian ideas are introduced into China and they have to fit into Chinese culture rather than in other places where Indian ideas are introduced into like Thailand or whatever, and they transform the culture, right? So I think you're saying the same thing that I am, which is, it's less impactful in China than it is in other parts of the world, right? So if you're looking in China and you're saying, where is there this big influence of Buddhist medicine? I can say it's in all of the practices that are being done in the temples, but it's not in the medical theory, in the Chinese medical theory. So that's one part of that. There's an objection to the objection, but the other part is this. The other part of what you said, maybe this is too much detail for this conversation, but the other part of what you said is about the ideas in the Buddhist text being Ayurvedic, but actually historians of Indian medicine, of course, Ayurveda says that it's 5,000 years old and it comes from the Vedas and blah, 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 blah. But historians of medicine who study the medical texts and their history in India have shown us that the texts that we have that from the Ayurvedic tradition are actually later than the Pali Canon. Pali Canon comes first. So when you look at the Pali Canon and then you look at the early texts in India from Indian medicine, they're different from one another. And even the Ayurvedic texts are different from one another. You have Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita and Bhagavata's Ashtanga Hridayam. Those 3 are different from one another. So there isn't one Vedic Indian ancient form of medicine, there's actually 4 different traditions that we can identify. What's in the Pali, what's in the Charaka, what's in the Sushruta, what's in the Bhagavata. And they're different. And then you look at the translations that are done into China, we have translations coming from the early time period, and those are different too. And
They are, these texts that you mentioned, they are Vedic inspired. They are not indigenously coming from a Buddhist idea. So,
Yeah.
of course, as a result of transmitting Buddhism into different parts of East Asia, these texts are also translated. But coming from like indigenously Buddhist kind of medicine idea, I don't see a good correlation. But
Yeah.
I do see that in the northern part of China, the use of saffron, the use of cinnamon, which was never found in China itself, these are never grown in China. They are largely used, in the northern part of China. This could have been an influence coming from India. Yeah, but as I said, I've not seen any particular indigenously formula that was coming from India that was transmitted into China or Korea.
yeah, great. So yeah, I forgot that part of your question. So you remember when I said I like to give homework? So you should read Chen Ming. Chen Ming is a scholar at Beida, at Beijing University. He's written in Chinese many extensive books, like 5 or 6 books and lots of articles answering that question. What specific formulas and medicinal substances were translated into Chinese and where did they wind up? And he talks about, he traces them all coming in through Buddhist texts and then being inserted into different Chinese bancao, like the pharmacological literature. And so he has a detailed account of all of that. And there's actually a lot of it. The only minor thing I want to say about the Vedic stuff is that the way I think about it is that there were actually different lineages in India, different streams of medicine in different lineages. Some medical knowledge was carried in the Charaka lineage, some was carried in the Sushruta lineage. Some of it seems to have been carried in Buddhist lineages. And rather than thinking about, oh, it's all Vedic, I think about medical pluralism, that there's different forms of medicine in India, in different parts of India, in different communities in India. And what we know from the Chinese pilgrims who came to India a little bit later, but people like I Ching, right, come to India, what we know is that they see Buddhist medical lineages in India at that time. They're reporting on Buddhist medical lineages. So I think this whole idea that all of Indian medicine is Vedic in origin actually is later. And it's a way of erasing the diversity that was there before and making it more unified. And that comes later. But this is ideas I get from my colleagues who study the history of Ayurveda. That's not my own argument. Yeah.
Right. Thanks for Brother Victor's question. Okay, just a quick interjection before we get to Brother Shahido. Also, because we do have a live stream going on, and there is a question from the live stream, just a very quick interjection. There's a question asking simply, when is the book on Chanping coming out? Yeah.
April. April 26th. Yeah, April 26th from University of Hawaii Press. Yeah.
Okay, so in case that wasn't audible for the live stream, like, yes, of course, yeah.
Follow up. Just on your point, and partly harking back to where you started about Michel Strickland's book, one of the things that he points out is it's not just the herbs that are coming in, but also many visualization, mantric, and other kinds of practices which are in the tongue are part of tongue court tantric practice. But in the Song, they become vernacularized, and they go into the public, and they get picked up by the Taoist clergy. So by the time they get into the Daozang Huiyu and other later, like late post-Song texts, they're already looking Taoist. But many of these things are coming out of Buddhist Tantra from Tang, Buddhist High Court Tantra in their earlier things. And just as you mentioned cinnamon, there's a colleague of ours in Washington who's arguing from phonetic evidence that the Ruogui that's being used in the Shanghan Lun, right, very early, that this reference is actually, it's from a Sanskrit term, and the name is coming out of a Sanskrit term. So he's arguing much earlier introduction of cinnamon as through Buddhist things. It's a very novel argument, but anyway, just two follow-ups on that.
Thanks, Dr. Barker. Right. So yes, a question from Brother Shahidu.
Thank you. Thanks for your talk. So I have a clarificatory question. So you mentioned that in different Buddhist traditions, they had different conceptualization of how Buddhist medicine works.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, what do you mean by how Buddhist medicine works? It is physical or psychological mechanism or something like this? And also, the different concepts, is it merely a linguistic difference or more substantial difference?
Yeah, yeah. So what I meant when I said that was that, like Pali text, for example, when the Pali text talks about the body, they always talk about the Mahabhuta, earth, water, fire, wind, space. That's how they understand the body to work. And so when Buddhist sutras, in Sanskrit as well, when Buddhist sutras are talking about medicine, they use those concepts. They use the Mahabhuta to describe. So we have, for example, the Sutra of Golden Light. We have the Avatamsaka Sutra also, the Huayan Jing. These are texts that have sections in them that talk about the body, and they talk about the health of the body and how medicine works and how healers can help people to become well and why people become sick and all of that. And they're using the Indian concepts. They're talking about Mahabhuta, right? Earth, water, fire, wind. These are Indian ideas, and that's very different than when all these texts are translated into Chinese, and the Chinese translators, they have to figure out what to do with Mahabhuta, and so many times they translate this as Si Da, for great things, right? For great things, right? Earth, water, fire, and wind. So this Si Da is a Chinese translation of the term Chatur Mahabhuta, right? It's like a direct translation of the Sanskrit. So that's what they do when they translate the texts. But then when the Chinese commentators are talking about this text, they transform that theory into Chinese ideas, right? They drop the Indian concepts, and they pick up Chinese concepts, and they talk about Chinese concepts, right? So that today, if you're in a Chinese Buddhist context and they're talking about, doing some kind of exercise, they're almost 100% of the time going to use qi as the explanation, or yin yang, or wuxing, or some other Chinese concepts in order to explain why that technique is working. They're not going to reach for the Indian Sanskrit terminology, and that's totally different in Thailand, Tibet, Myanmar, where it's the Indian concepts that are the primary thing that is used to explain how one gets sick and how one gets better. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. There's so much about the philosophy of language here as well. Yeah. Okay. I'm just mindful of time, so perhaps maybe a last one or two questions. Yeah, because it is the workday evening, so we're just so even though it's until 9:30 technically, just to clarify, but perhaps the last one or two questions. Yeah.
I attended a meetup before. There were some interesting topics about Buddhist and philosophy. They were talking about dependence arising. You know, the 12 factors of dependent arising. The third factor is consciousness, then the mind, body, nama, rupa. So if the consciousness is fragmented, mind, body also fragmented. That's where the mind, body, mental illness and the body illness come out, because the consciousness is already fragmented. So if the consciousness is healed whole, integrated, like individuation in Carl Jung's shadow work, repressed shadow, if you integrate your shadow with your ego or whatever, consciousness or unconscious, they have a different term for consciousness. In Carl Jung, it's unconscious. Then in Buddhist philosophy, it's consciousness. And then if you integrate it, that means you integrate the fragmentation of the consciousness, the third factor of dependent arising. Does it mean that you heal the mind body? Does that mean that, you know, in leukemia cancer treatment, you boost the immunity cells to cure the leukemia? So that means in Buddhist philosophy, they were talking that if you boost the immunity, like for example, in consciousness, you use 50% to suppress the trauma or the anger or the depression. If this 50% used to suppress the trauma is released, it becomes 100% to tackle the cancer. That means you can cure your cancer or other illnesses. May I have your comments on that idea, that if you heal the consciousness, you can almost heal all the mind-body sickness in Buddhist or whatever. And then, you know, in modern medicine, leukemia, you also boost the immunity cells. And if 50% of the immune system is used to suppress anger or trauma or whatever emotional illness, does it mean that you can particularly cure everything, the mind-body sickness? Even though Siddhartha himself also, due to karma, also got some physical illness. I mean, something like that, karma that are not able to reverse some karma in his body. So what is your comment?
So that's not a question for a historian. I understand what you're saying, 100%. I might have an opinion about what you're saying. I think you might be right, but I'm only saying that as my opinion because I can't have an informed argument about that question because it involves certain kinds of research that I don't do, right? Like, I think that's an empirical question that you could actually study, right? You could study people who have had a certain kind of experience, you know, through meditation or through whatever, and gather together a group of people and actually study their immune system. And, you know, you could take blood samples and so on and so forth. You could do an empirical study to answer that question. It might be difficult to identify who participates in your study. You might have some challenges there, but I think it could be, there could be a model to do that kind of study. But as far as I know, that kind of study hasn't been done. I mean, but I don't follow that kind of research, so I'm not sure. But what you're asking about, I think what you're asking about is, like, generally speaking, you know, to be more abstract about it, what you're asking is, what's the mechanism of how mind and body interplay? Why, like, what's the mechanism for why having certain kinds of experiences, having certain kinds of wisdom, certain kinds of realizations can help with the body. What's the mechanism there for that, for that relationship to happen? And I think that is like a super important question that we haven't really begun to research yet, right? We haven't really begun to research the relationship between the mind and the body and how contemplative practice and the realizations that you can have impact that relationship. I don't think we've really even begun to study that. I think there's a few people that have just now started to maybe move in that direction in terms of proper neuroscience, proper medical research, but I don't know that we have any conclusions yet about that.
You just also said, if you have faith, you can be healed.
So generally like that, we do have empirical evidence. So they have done studies of like, people that pray or people that participate in certain kinds of spiritual practices and what the outcomes are of their well-being, of their illnesses, right? And it turns out, yes, routinely they show that spiritual practice, religious practice has a positive effect on outcomes, generally speaking. But the mechanism why, the mechanism how that happens, I think is what, to your comment earlier, I think that's what's usually just kind of like, oh, it's placebo effect, right? Meaning we can't explain it, meaning we don't know the mechanism right now. Right. So your question is getting to like a question about a specific kind of mechanism that I would say that's a hypothesis to be studied, right? Does having certain kinds of meditation experiences have a direct effect on your immune system's capacity to, to heal? I think that's an interesting question.
No.
Sorry, maybe just a final question.
Yeah, I don't mean contemplative. I'm talking about integrating consciousness.
Yeah.
Specifically integrating consciousness, not like in Carl Jung's integrating your shadow.
Yeah.
Like faith, like being connected to God or being connected to yourself, your mini self, to the big self in the Hindu philosophy.
Yeah.
The Purusha or what, and then to the Brahman or whatever.
Yeah.
The connection. Jesus says the faith where you have connection to God, and then the Buddhism integrate your consciousness.
Yeah.
Carl Jung integrating your shadow into your.
Yeah. You just described a clinical trial, right? You have 3 different populations with 3 different interventions, right? And you test and see what the impact of those 3 different, kinds of experiences are on their immune system or whatever, right? It's an empirical question. If you could figure out how to do it, you could study that. Yeah. I just don't think it's been done yet. Yep.
Okay, if we could just check whether there's any final burning question from anyone on this. All right. Then if not, if you can join me in thanking Prof. Salguero for this very fascinating, insightful talk. Okay. Right.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody here. Nixon, thank you for everything that you did for facilitating this. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you. And if we could, thank you, Prof. We're going to show this QR code. If we can invite everyone to scan it as well, and maybe from this way, right? And just to share your inputs and feedback, right? This would really mean a lot to us. So if you could just scan it and share, we're just going to show it right now.